Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is welcome to our third webinar entitled When Hospitality and Belonging Becomes Hard, Faith Community Strategies for Responding to Adults with Varying Needs. This is again, like I said, this is our third webinar in our four-part webinar series that explored challenging aspects of hospitality of people with disabilities in the life of communities of faith. If you missed our first and second sessions, no problem. It is available on our website to catch up. So this webinar is brought to you by AAIDD's Religion and Spirituality Interest Network and Stonebelt ARC. Thank you for joining us. And my name is Reverend Sarah McKenney. I'm from Stonebelt ARC, and I will be our tech host today. Just to kind of go over some Zoom instructions. This webinar will be recorded and available, like I said, in the future on our website. The web address is on your screen, and you can also go ahead and register for the last one in the series. I will also be sending a follow-up email in the next few days where you can also, where I will be sending you the direct link to the recorded session, as well as a PDF of these beginning slides. We really don't have slides for the rest of the presentation, so we will go, but you will be able to see these slides in case you need that for reference. Now, for some Zoom instructions, you will notice that your microphones are muted. You will be able to use the chat function to ask questions or comments, or if you want to share who you are, what you do, and use it for networking, that's okay too, all of the above. You can send in your questions throughout our chat, even though we will reserve a section at the end to really dive into those, but we might check on those throughout as well. Anything we do, any questions that are not answered during our time here, we will be checking those and get back to you via email. So if you can also include any of your emails, that is also a great option as well. And then we will try and get back to you that way. Let's see. You will also see that there is closed captioning available. You can either turn on these, you can either show these closed captions, or you can also hide them. If you, and you will also notice if you go to that setting, the closed caption setting, you can also see a running transcript that will go on a sidebar as well, if you want that larger context and readout. If you are having any technical difficulties, I will be checking my email throughout as much as I can. So I will put my email also in the chat, and you can send me those questions or those concerns, and I'll try and get to those as we have our conversation today. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our moderator, Amy Petre-Hill. Amy is the founder of Mental Health and Inclusion Ministries. Please welcome her. Good to see you today, Amy.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. And thank you for being our technical host and panelist. You know, you're doing double duty, so appreciate it. And it is my joy to introduce all of the panelists. I've had the joy of meeting and talking with all of them. So if you could go to the first slide, for a Sarah, for Cindy. Oh, it's Beth, who is wonderful. Beth is the special ed ministry coordinator at Colorado Community Church in Aurora. I live in Aurora as well. And she has been doing this work for decades. And what I found so wonderful about Beth is she is so open to talking about the challenges she's experienced, how she's overcome them, to offer a welcoming ministry to all at her church. And also, she has videos on her website that provide advice. We're so glad to have her and her experience and her stories with us today. And if you could go to the next person. There we go. I think it's going to be Cindy. All right. We have Cindy, who is also amazing, but doing this work for a long time. She's the director of Christian education and All Abilities Inclusion Ministry at First Presbyterian Church in Birmingham, Michigan, which is close to Detroit. And again, she has a master's of special education, and she has lots of passion for this and lots of experience to share. And then we are also honored to have Rabbi Baruch Bobby Rosenberg with us, who is a spiritual leader of Or HaOlam, which is a virtual space, which is exciting. He's going to tell us a little more about this, for people with a variety of abilities to engage in their Jewish faith and spirituality. And we are really honored to have him with us today as well. And then, of course, last but not least, we have Miss Sarah Vanderzee McKinney, who is in a very interesting position. She has found a way to help within an agency, help that agency and help those it serves connect with faith communities for her clients and the people that she cares for. So Sarah, we're so glad to have you, of course, and we look forward to hearing your perspective from the agency point of view during our discussion. Thank you for being here. So now I'd like to encourage everybody, yay, everyone. We now can see everyone. And what we're going to do is first, I want to just kind of create a context and talk a little bit about some of the issues that we've heard continue to come up for faith communities that are trying to think about how to provide places of genuine and authentic belonging to people with a variety of abilities. One of the issues that's come up is that congregations can be hesitant, congregations of any faith tradition can be hesitant to invite, in particular, adults with neurodiversity, not because they don't want to have them there, but it's a sense of, we don't know enough. We don't want to do this badly. How accessible are we going to have to make our building? It's kind of overwhelming. And everyone on this panel has walked through this and can talk a little bit about this, but that's one of those issues. Another one is that faith communities may feel that they're on their own. Maybe they don't know that there's agencies like Sarah, or there's these mentors like Rabbi Bobby and Cindy and Beth across the country who are there and ready to encourage them and talk with them about issues. So that can be another challenge. A third challenge is that human service organizations, even wonderful ones like Stone Belt Arc in Indianapolis, Indiana, they have their own vocabulary, their way that they have to function under Medicaid, which is a different language than faith communities use. So, sometimes there can be an issue of talking past one another, even though agencies and faith communities really want to work together. And then finally, there's the issue of how faith communities can partner with direct service providers who make it possible for individuals, some adults with special needs, to fully participate in the life of their faith community of choice. And so we're going to touch on these issues through conversation. And we're going to start with me just asking a few questions of each of the panelists, one question, and then we're going to go into a larger kind of organic conversation. And then in the last 10 minutes, we are going to open it up and we're going to look at the questions that have been in the chat. And as Sarah mentioned, if we don't get to your question, we are going to save all those questions and we are going to make sure that everyone gets a response to their question afterward via email. So wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with you. Cindy, you are the Director of Christian Education and All Abilities Inclusion Ministries at a mainline Protestant Presbyterian church. You've been doing this for a long time. And I also know that you've held conferences and helped other faith communities do this. With all that experience, I'm wondering, what were some of the initial conversations or initial thoughts that you needed to have in your faith community to start offering that radical welcome to adults with varying needs?
So our ministry really grew out of a children's ministry. But as they got older and as we began to hold conferences and meetings with other churches who were looking to do the same thing, we realized that we were missing another part of the population, the adults. And the adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities are generally reluctant to cross the threshold of a church they don't know and don't know the welcome that they'll get. And so it was a sort of a dual thing. We were looking to expand our worship to invite people with intellectual disabilities into our building. And so we got connected with Rejoicing Spirits, a network of churches that do services for people of all abilities. Now, there's a whole different conversation about that, but we did that. But in so doing, part of the process for starting that was we were required to go out into the community and talk with providers of residential and community-based supports to get the opinions about timing, about the kinds of things that would be needed for their individuals to participate. And so we learned a lot in that time, and we were able to, well, just by doing that, we went to one provider called Angel's Place. They had a network of a little more than 20 homes, and we visited 2 homes. And in those visits, we met wonderful people who then we still have connections with, and they told us what it was that they wanted. And we put it together and we started these Rejoicing Spirit services. And through that, I would say they also became more involved in the full life of the church, began to come to other services, began to serve in different ways, to usher, to join committees, to do a whole variety of things, and then become more organically involved in the whole life of the church. So it was, it's a process, of course, and it was building relationships along the way. But we had to reach out to, a nonprofit provider that we never would have thought of on our own.
Thank you, Cindy.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate so much that you and your congregation were willing to do that for Steph. I know that takes some courage.
It was an interesting step, yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and turn to Beth for a moment. Beth, you have been doing a specialized ministry, several. You oversee 4 of them at Colorado Community Church, which is a non-denominational or multi-denominational Christian faith community. And you have been working with adults and families and children and sometimes direct service providers for years. And I know you also coach other faith communities, which is wonderful. What, kind of building on what Cindy was talking about, what are some of the fears that you faced in launching your ministry for adults? And how, you know, how have you helped, your church and other faith communities kind of get over that fear and just start doing this welcoming?
Yeah, I think for us, we also started in children's ministry. A lot of churches start programs with children's ministry, and we saw those kids growing into our youth and our adult ministry. So I think we had overcome some of our fear initially by setting up programs for children. But yeah, what I've heard from a lot of churches is their big fear with adults is that, adults often with IDD aren't as cute as kids, and adults are bigger. And so if adults with behaviors that people aren't comfortable with and aren't trained to support escalate, people who don't feel comfortable with that are more uncomfortable with interacting with an adult who maybe doesn't have a caregiver who's coming independently. So that was definitely a fear that I've heard. And also people seem to have a fear that they're going to get overwhelmed, with like they're going to open their doors, they're going to create a program, no matter how big the church is, small, large, and somehow they're going to get overwhelmed, like a herd of elephants is going to come bursting through their doors, and they're not going to be able to handle the numbers or behaviors that they're not trained to handle, or that the expectations of the individual or the family are unrealistic for what the church can provide. And so the way that we have overcome that, and that I have kind of advised other churches, is I always say, look at your church culture and your environment, and start organically. Start with who you already have there, because chances are, based on the number of people impacted by disability in our country, you already have people in your congregation who are experiencing some kind of disability. They're probably hidden. They probably maybe haven't come forth. They might have an invisible disability that we know of. Maybe they're on the autism spectrum, ADHD, something like that. But they're probably adults who are experiencing that. They haven't come forth. So how can you reach out to them or their families if they're coming with caregivers? And how can you ask them, what do they want? And it might be very different than you think. You think you need to establish this giant program, when instead it could be that, for example, they really enjoy going to service and they're already doing that independently. What they might want is, hey, I'd really like to have an adapted Bible study during the week that I could attend, right? I need some support to do that, right? Or, for example, it might be a young adult who is fairly independent who says, I'd really like to attend the young adult ministry every week, but I need some support to do that. And that's already happening. It's not a separate program that you need to create, but to try to find some support for that, some peer support in the young adult group. So it's really a more individual, adapted, organic approach. So it's really amazing what you can do with what you already have. And I think that takes away some of the fears, right? I also think that when we set up realistic expectations for the family or for the adult, that can take away a lot of our anxiety on the ministry side. And I really think the expectations that a lot of families and individuals have, honestly and sadly, in a way, they can be pretty low. I think what are we all looking for from a faith community? We're all coming and looking to interact with God and to find genuine relationship and community with each other, right? We all have that human need. So if that's what we're looking for, that's the expectation that people, regardless of ability, regardless of their neurodiversity, are looking for. So if that's the case, then how do we set up clear expectations for what we can offer wherever we are in the process of a program, so that they know what we can offer coming in, and we're clear communicating that, so that I feel that takes away a lot of the anxiety. So when they come, we're on the same page, but that we're listening to what they want and they need, and then we just let the program progress from there and kind of add on layers to meet the needs of really starting with who we have.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks wow, we got 3 really, I think, key points. And I reflect that both you and Cindy were like listening to what people need, not starting with an expectation, but going out first and saying, what's the need. And Rabbi Bobby, I would like to turn to you now, because you have done this and you have been addressing the spiritual needs of people in a very unique way by creating a virtual Jewish spiritual community. And I'd love you to tell us a little more about that, and also how the way you're doing this is not only allowing people to participate, but also to lead and actually, help shape this spiritual community.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So really, Or HaOlam came about more as a fluke, if you will. I was teaching in a regular synagogue setting, working with youth, and noticed a lot of my kids that were coming to me had various disabilities. Some of them were physical, some were learning, some were more emotional. There were just like a huge spectrum. And as I was adapting my classroom to better meet the needs of the students who were coming in, I realized what was happening was once they were kind of done with like bar bat mitzvah, or when they were done with confirmation, they were also kind of done with synagogue life. They were exiting out of our faith. And a lot of that I felt was because they didn't feel like they had a place that they fit. Their voice wasn't heard. And I realized, there was so much I can do within the context as a teacher. I could, shape my classroom, but how do you keep those kids in? How do you engage them? How do you help them grow? And I realized they needed a space where their voice was heard. So I got the idea that I should create a synagogue of some sort where, it's dedicated to kids with disabilities. And I was super excited for it and realized that, it was more challenging, of course, but there were also like young adults with disabilities that were like, hey, we want a space too. And then, just adults and then older adults. So suddenly like everybody needed a space. And I was like, that's okay, good. We're going to make this space happen. Hence the virtual part. And the reason I went virtual was because I realized there were a lot of members of our community that were homebound or hospital bound or were caregivers. So thus homebound or hospital bound, taking care of their charges, that were missing out on community life. And they needed a place where it's kind of there. Whether you're popping in at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is what I typically do because I don't sleep, or whether you're popping in at 8 o'clock in the morning with everybody else, we needed a very flexible community. And I felt that I could, since I saw that need, that I could fill that need. So I created Or HaOlam, again, starting with concentrating on youth and then kind of moving it out, to include basically anybody in the community, whether they're affected by a disability personally or not. And then realizing that once you had this space, right, part of the problem that the kids were having was they didn't feel comfortable, right? It wasn't a safe place for them in a traditional learning environment or communal worship environment. But if you give them a place where they're not worried about, okay, I didn't pronounce that word perfectly. Is someone judging me? No, in this place, it's safe. So if you mispronounce a word in a prayer, it's not a big deal, right? And they realize that. If they don't speak quite as fast as somebody or they stumble a little bit, that's okay, right? This is a safe place. And I wanted them to realize that when we are coming together to worship, we're not trying to show off what we can do, right? We're still learning. Right. So that means, yes, even as a rabbi, I make mistakes. Okay, I'm reading along. Okay, I mispronounced a word. It happens. Great. And I wanted the kids and the other adults to realize that, yes, you can learn and you can guide. And what better way to do that than give them a place where they can learn and guide others. And so I wanted it to kind of be like a trickle down effect where, I'm working with the youngest ones, but okay, you have a teenager. Here's a great opportunity for this teenager to work with some other teens or work with some of the younger kids who are coming up and build their confidence and build their skill levels and find how they want to better go with their walk with God, with Hashem, right? So giving them that space and Or HaOlam is just kind of giving that opportunity so we can learn with each other and grow with each other. And that's what I really wanted to see happen.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi Bobby. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for being willing to be here and explain how that happened. I hear this kind of organic nature and ability to be flexible from every one of the leaders that we've had on. I so appreciate that. So now I'm going to turn to Sarah. And Sarah, you are a faith leader, you are a minister, but you are serving in a really unique place as part of an agency and helping that agency imagine how to partner with faith communities and meet the unique needs of the clients and friends that your agency serves. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about how that happened and how maybe faith communities can start to reach out and partner with agencies like yours?
Absolutely. So I initially started this knowing, first of all, not realizing that I was, it was after seminary. I kind of, through conversations and experiences I had through seminary and before seminary, I realized a lot of people with disabilities in my hometown of Bloomington, Indiana, were not welcome in their faith communities. And so after seminary, I went to the primary agency that I knew about back in my hometown and said, hey, do you have a chaplain? And they're like, no, we don't do that. And I said, well, can we? And not really knowing that I thought I was asking something that was normal. And they said, no, we don't do that. And I said, well, whatever job you have, I'll take. And so I was a DSP and did a variety of jobs for about 5 years until I withered my way and worked and on them for a while until I convinced them. But a large part of convincing them was helping to show what we were already doing, which was in our mission statement. In the state of Indiana, I will recognize that in the state of Indiana, our waivers are, so that's the, for those of you who don't know, waivers are the Medicaid kind of financial package that people with disabilities can sign up for, and then that offers a variety, offers access to a variety of services through those waivers. So our waiver and our services in Indiana are actually, we have adopted, years ago, we adopted the life course model framework. And that's kind of a whole health way of looking at care. And so that was already, and that included spiritual and community engagement and relationship building as a primary importance of a person's life. And so all of our individualized support plans in the state of Indiana are required to have a section on spirituality and relationship engagement. And so I kind of, drew their attention to the fact that this is already, our state already says that this is important. And I showed them that our mission statement and our 7 principles of service were really talking about these core spiritual principles of belonging, connection, value, purpose, relationship. And that's what I mean by spirituality. And for some people, that might be through a specific faith tradition or religious practice. For others, that might be going and hiking and being in nature, or both. And so that started to draw the lines. And then as we kind of grew the program, people started to notice how many people have wanted to go to a faith community, but didn't know it was an option, they were not welcome, and so they stopped going. DSPs didn't know how to advocate for people when they went to a faith community, especially if it was a faith community that they weren't familiar with. So this program is to help kind of bridge some of those gaps. So I try and help I'll meet one-on-one with some of the folks that we support, help them figure out what it is that they believe, and then try and connect them to a faith community that kind of matches the theology, but also what they find is most important. And then I also work with faith communities in the area. And I will say, so to answer your kind of second question, one of my biggest recommendations is similar to what has already actually been discussed through Cindy and Beth, is to encourage faith communities to reach out to agencies and just say, by explaining a contact number and saying, if anybody wants to go here, this is a little bit about our faith community. We'd love anybody who's interested in coming, for them to come. What do you need in order to help you feel welcome? I will also add, transportation for a lot of agencies is the primary issue. We are short-staffed. In fact, this is what my doctoral study is all about, is on this dilemma of transportation. And we have, one of the ways that we have done that is we will take on faith community members as official volunteers, which means they get a little bit of training, they get background checks, they get to check all of the policies and procedures that state governance loves us to have. And then they're kind of approved as being approved liability-wise through us to help with some of that transportation, so a DSP is less needed. That's not going to work for everyone, but that hugely helps for the DSPs to then be available toward people who need that, like that actual staff presence. I'll just leave it there for now.
That's a lot. I know you have so much, everybody on this panel has so much important and wonderful work going on. And I'm just gonna pull out something that I heard you say, I heard other people refer to, which is, of course, asking for help is okay. Asking agencies for help, asking other faith communities that are doing this, right? Anybody on this panel would freely, talk to someone. But I want to hone in for a moment about the experience of direct service providers. They are overworked, they are underpaid. We know this, we know agencies are struggling, even with the best intentions. And because of COVID and everything else, we're all a little bit exhausted. So I would like to, I've heard, Sarah, how you help empower DSPs and do that work. I would like to ask our three faith community leaders here, how do you help either family members or direct service providers bring someone in and make it possible for that person to fully participate while also making that DSP feel comfortable and valued, even if they aren't of the same faith tradition that that your community is? And I'm going to open it up. Whoever feels inspired to go first, just go. Okay. There we go. Yay, Cindy.
All right. So I mean, every situation is different. It's so individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we meet a person, we had a young man who initially, through the Rejoicing Spirit service, wanted to come on Sunday morning. So he needed a ride. And so that was the first thing we provided. We provided our network of deacons in the Presbyterian Church. That's what they do for anybody. People who can't get to church, they provide transportation. So Kevin gets a ride on Sunday mornings with the deacons. That was the first thing. But there are many other things in life. He wanted somebody to bike ride with him. in the summer, and his care provider said that that was what he really loved to do. And so there was a member of our congregation who loved to bike ride, so goes bike riding with them. It really is getting to know the person, getting to know their likes and dislikes and things they want to do. And Kevin became an usher. He's the face of the church when people come in. And he just recently trained another young man in his late teens who just came to us through another nonprofit that meets in our church, serving people with disabilities. And so it's all so connected, and it's such a small world of service providers. Our service providers have been ones connected with our folks have been great, very easy to communicate with. Little things like occasionally giving them some Starbucks cards or, a little gift to boost them, a gift of gratitude for their presence, their services, just goes a long way. So I could go on, but yeah.
No, that's wonderful. It just makes them feel seen and part of the community in whatever way they want to be part of the community. That just sounds so honoring and empowering. Thank you, Cindy. Rabbi Bobby and Beth, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on this?
Yeah. So while I don't really have service providers coming to the synagogue or whatever right now, in the past, one of the things that was really important for me and for other faith leaders in our synagogue and other members and leaders there was to make sure that the service providers knew they had a space that was theirs. We understood that most of these providers were not Jewish. They're coming in, and we didn't want them to feel as though they had to participate in our service in order to feel welcome. So we wanted them to be very clear. If we are in the middle of a service and you don't feel comfortable sitting in that service, that's okay. We have congregants who are happy to sit with the person that that you brought. Here's a place that you can go over here. You can read your book. You can do what you need to do. For some of our congregants, like my particular synagogue at the time, we don't use like cell phones. We don't use regular technology. But for a service provider, right, they may need that cell phone. They're communicating with other people, and again, they're not part of our faith tradition, and we're not expecting them to suddenly, stop everything. So, clear communication, we just ask that you have it on silent. We understand that you might need to use your cell phone. If you could exit, if you need to make an actual call, but to let them know, we're not going to judge you if you need to pull out your cell phone. We're not going to judge you if you're not standing at the time that we're standing. If you're, not engaged in our prayer book or singing along, that's okay. And so it was really important for them to know that their faith tradition, their beliefs, where they are at, was just as valid and as important as the person that they were caring for. And so again, making sure they knew here's where you can come and be comfortable, letting them know that, when we're after service, we're going to have some food. You're welcome to eat with us and drink with us. And if you don't feel comfortable doing so, that's totally fine as well. But letting that communication, letting them know that they also had a safe place that wasn't dictated by our beliefs. And I think that's really important for all providers to know, that they can be genuinely themselves and on their own path, and know that they still are welcome and respected in our midst as well.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Again, clear communication, it keeps coming up. Beth, I would love to get your thoughts on this.
One thing we found interesting is I just had a meeting actually this week with one of our CCBs. So for us, that's a community center board, and they're the ones who basically have case managers who manage the services for clients with disabilities. And they wanted to, actually, it's an interesting situation. One of the case managers attends our church. And so we have a large church with a lot of space. And so he has been wanting to connect with me for a while because they have a nonprofit connected to the CCB that runs day programs and residential homes. And COVID has been hard. for them to get out. And they are actually located, their office is not far from our church. And he said, I've been wanting to reach out for a while. How can we partner? So perhaps we could use some of your space for some of our small groups that go out with 1 care provider and 5 adults. And so we were just brainstorming about ways that we could support them in them using our space. And, you know, ideas like a weekly, especially during inclement weather in the winter, they could come into our lobby and have lunch and sit by our big fireplace and then go use our gym and shoot some hoops or use our youth rec room, right? So that's a way we can bless them. It's not necessarily that they're coming and being part of our program, but we're opening up a place for them to come and use our resources, right? So it's really trying to create a partnership and just be available to them with our resources. One great idea they had was we have a very active senior pickleball league now, like every morning at our gym. And they were saying, oh, our adults would love to come and cheer them on. And the idea is, how can we create some relationships between some neurodiverse adults and neurotypical adults in the church that might be outside of our worship services, that might be outside of our kind of typical church programming, you know? Because I think, again, it's those relationships, those one-on-one relationships. How do we create space for those to happen and really think outside the box to do that? And so this is something again, it's just organic and it's being flexible. And I love that they were able to approach us and say, you guys have this great space. We have a need. You know, how do we make this happen? So I just think it's being open to those opportunities.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Beth. I did want to throw out one question too, just because during this webinar, we've been talking about how do you manage behaviors? Behaviors is communication. Someone is acting a certain way in a faith community that feels maybe disruptive. It isn't intended to, it's communicating something. And since you're all working with adults with a variety of abilities and needs, has there been a time when an individual has been communicating some distress or something in a particular way that may have felt disruptive, and that you were able to partner either with agencies or parents or whomever it was in the community to find out what that person needed and then give them what they needed to succeed in your faith community? That's for everybody. If you have an example or a thought you'd like to share.
Sure. We've had a number of situations where some behavior, particularly on Sunday morning, was perhaps not appropriate. Maybe there were some young teens who were feeling threatened by the presence of a male with intellectual developmental disabilities who maybe got too close or sat with them. And, you know, there's just a sense of insecurity and a little fear. And then the parents are on top of all that. And so we just reached out to the agency, and because we have this relationship with them, and talked to them about it. And they gave us some very helpful suggestions for how to deal with that, and just to, you know, talk directly with the person and say, this is what we do and this is what we don't do. And it worked just fine. You know, we've had numerous times like that, and it's just fine when you have the conversation and try to and deal with it. So if you don't deal with it and you ignore it, then you're really going to have a problem.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Cindy. Others have an example or some thoughts on that? Yeah.
So I was actually thinking back to a student that I had who has a radical attachment disorder. And at the time, I didn't actually know, I didn't know what that was, and I didn't know he had it. He actually was just a student in my classroom, and he had came in, and I was told by other teachers, you know, he has some challenges, you know, he might be a handful here and there, you know, here, you might want to talk to his parents. And I just kind of let it go. But he had a really bad day. It was one of those days. It was just an off day, and was acting out. And so I myself have different disabilities, and I'm on the autism spectrum myself. So I was like, okay, I'm seeing some flags. I'm seeing some things that I've seen in myself and, and whatnot. And I actually just sat down and, we had a conversation. And it was really like, help me understand, are you having a bad day? What's going on? Like, it was just talking to him as a person, not yelling at him. I'm not mad at you. I just want to know what's going on. Clearly you're trying to communicate something. If you're having an off day, help me help you. Like, how can I best help you? And so what I found was actually partnering with him worked really well. We made a little partnership. He would do X amount of work, and then he would become my assistant for the rest of the time. And it actually prevented him from, stopping other students from learning or having their experience and connecting with God. But then he also learned a lot from that experience as well. And so what I found was, I could have easily gone to his parents. I could have easily gone to other administrators or service providers that were working with him. But the best choice I had at that time was just to be with him, to be present with him, to hold space for him, and to allow him to have those natural feelings that he needed to get out, and then go forward and say, okay, now that we know what's going on, how can we make this easier for you? And letting him kind of dictate what worked best was really helpful. And I think really altered how things went forward for him after that.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think that's a great example of course, talk to the person if that's something that will work for them, depending on how they communicate. So we're getting close to time, but I do want to ask one final question. And again, it's for everybody. The question is, we talk about, well, we are going to do this to include these folks as if it's just a one-way flow. And we know that that's not true. We get as much or more from the people who enthusiastically join our faith communities from all backgrounds and abilities. So the question I have for all of you is how, and I guess maybe example of when there was this transformation point when it wasn't about doing ministry for or to, and became with, and individuals of all abilities were showing their leadership and helping other people grow spiritually. And we don't have much time, so I'm sorry, but if you have a quick example, that would be wonderful. And again, it's open to everybody if they have an example they want to share.
I can share a story. I don't know if it was the moment because being somebody with a disability, I spent my childhood in a special ed classroom for a long time before we figured out how my brain worked. But I will say within the role of the spiritual support coordinator, I had a wonderful moment, and so did a DSP, when I sat down with someone to kind of explore what they believed. And I just plainly asked them, how do you see God most in your life? And the DSP quickly was like, they aren't going to understand that question. And I said, well, give me some time. And the woman I was talking to only responds in like 1 or 2 words at a time. And so it takes her a while to respond. And then she'll give you a very thought out word or 2 words. And she responded that it was her brother. And again, this DSP was like, see, she didn't understand. And I said, well, again, give me some time. Throughout a 2-hour time span, I, with just asking clarification by clarification questions, we uncovered the story of her life, which was that when she was born, her parents found out that she had a disability. They stopped caring for her. They stopped feeding her. They stopped doing any sort of care. And it was her brother, who was like 5 years old, that kept her alive and was the only active family member ever in her life, even including now. And so really, when I asked, like, how is God most active in your life? She was spot on. Her brother is how God is most active in her life. And so it was that. And I just looked over to the DSP and they were just completely floored. And it was that moment of, see, they get it. And
Thank
it was
you.
a huge
Yeah.
preaching kind of sermon moment for everybody else.
Wow. Thank you so much. Time for one other quick one. I wish we had 3 more hours. Go ahead, Cindy.
I was just going to say, it is at our Rejoicing Spirits service when we have a prayer time. We go around with a microphone and put it in front of whoever wants to pray, raise their hands, and then we sing a little chorus in between each prayer request. And the prayers are so moving and so personal, and yet, they're praying for the world. They're praying for just their prayers are just amazing, and they touch everybody. And that service is really a gift to everybody who comes because of primarily the prayer time, I have to say, but the rest of it too.
Thank you, Cindy.
Mhm.
I'll just share that in my experience, having those kinds of very open, very interactive services, you get folks from the community coming in
Mhm.
of all abilities,
Mhm.
neurotypical with different abilities, and they love the energy of the service. So it's always a win-win, I think. And I think everyone's talked about that. So I am going to look to our chat here to see if we have some questions. So Dennis, I've seen your hand there. I don't know that we have the capacity to let people talk. I think we're pretty much doing it via chat, but I'm going to ask you, Sarah, is there a way, I think he might be on the phone,
Said it was
for
Dennis.
him to ask a question?
Let me see, Dennis.
Dennis Testerman. Oh, he may not be in a phone call.
I will. Dennis, you should be allowed to speak now.
So if you just want to unmute yourself, Dennis. Okay. Well, Dennis, I know sometimes the technology doesn't work with the, oh, there you go. You want to try to ask your question?
Not sure how that happened. I didn't have a question. Sorry for the confusion.
Oh, no problem. That's okay. Glad that you're here. So I'm looking through the questions, and a lot of them, people have been doing a wonderful time sharing what they're doing and saying how they are interested in partnering with other groups. Please, if you want to have people know your email and have people reach out, people have been good at that, please include it. And we will do this. I'm looking forward to see what we've got here in terms of questions. Would you share the initial slide with Zoom features? Yes, I know that Sarah's gonna, I think, send that out. If
I will
that, am I
send
hearing
that
the question
out
right?
in a day or two, if that's what you are talking about. You can raise your hand and I can have you ask a question verbally, or you can put it in chat. Deetra, are you wanting, you can either put your question in chat or I can give you permissions to speak. Perfect. Deetra, you should, there we go.
Yes, I have a question. I work for Special Olympics North America, and we started an initiative with our programs across the country to elevate our programming in urban communities. One of those things that we've asked programs to do is connect with faith-based communities, because really faith-based communities are at the heart of a lot of urban and city, in cities. So I'm wondering what everyone's experiences, if any, are with special needs ministries within Black and Brown communities.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, our church is very diverse. We're in an urban area, so we have a significant African American population as well as white. We're very diverse. So in terms of our ministry, I mean, it's diverse as well as it reflects the church and the community. And in terms of Special Olympics, you know, really most of our children, youth, and adults involved in our ministry are already involved in Special Olympics. So it's not something that we connect directly with Special Olympics because they're already involved in it individually, pretty much all 4 seasons. So it's not something we have to connect them to. If that's what you're asking, they're already pretty connected in Colorado, which is great, as is my daughter. So it's great.
Great.
That's also my experience of when I've served with ministries that have people from a large area with lots of different needs. Many of them are already involved in Special Olympics. And what we can do is we can help provide transportation as their faith family, and we can show up and cheer them on, which is like, oh my gosh, the basketball games are incredible. So again, I'm also in Colorado, so that's my experience. Cindy or Sarah, have you had a different experience with Special Olympics?
Special Olympics, our town is very engaged, and kind of all are welcome. The only extra thing that I'll say, when I reach out to faith communities, so faith communities that may be particular majority Black faith communities, they are equally engaged, and I work with them one-on-one, all the collectively, as well, as far as connecting people to their congregation as well. So our town Special Olympics is alive and well and very active.
Thank you, Sarah.
As in our area too, but we also have in our building, we have a nonprofit that's a therapeutic performing arts for people with disabilities, and they use our space. We provide space for them to do this in the building, and they do recreation therapy and art and music as well. So there's some of, you know, they have hockey, they have swimming, they have a variety of things. Obviously those aren't in our building, but those are the connections. I know that Special Olympics is a part of what they connect with as well.
Thank you, Cindy. Well, unfortunately, we're pretty much at time, but I'm looking through this and I saw William wanted to be able to share names and contact information of all participants, because if you mean all people on the panel, we can certainly do that. I think everyone is open to this, and this will go out in this email that Sarah sends. If you want to have, if you've been a participant in listening and you want to share your information, then we're happy to pass along that. But I don't think we can just do it for someone who isn't given us explicit permission. But I've seen a lot of people already putting their email address, which is wonderful. And I also wanted to take on from what Bill Gaventa, who is part of this webinar team at AAIDD. And the final webinar is going to be happening, and it's going to be theological reflection. So we've kind of done the, what are some of the practicalities? What are some of the challenges? And our next webinar is going to feature, and she's already sending it, she's so good, she's putting up there. It's going to be talking about how Muslim, Jewish, Christian theologians think about inclusion and having people with adults with a variety of needs and their enrichment in faith communities. So I want to thank all of the panelists. I want to thank everyone who was able and willing to show up and be here with us today. It was an honor and a pleasure. And we're going to close, but again, be on the lookout for in a few days for an email from Stonebelt that will have a link to this recording, and will have the information of folks who want to share their contact information. Blessings to all, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.